Hi everyone, my name is Professor E.J. Renold and I am here to share with you a very brief introduction to Wales's new statutory relationships and sexuality education. We have been privileged to design and deliver professional learning to schools in South Central Consortia for over 4 years now with Dr. Esther McGeaney and more recently Dr. Leanne Cole. What you will hear today in this short pre-recorded webinar is an overview of the new RSE and a little bit of how you can move forward in preparing for the changes that are coming. I'd like to apologise in advance for my croaky voice. I'm still suffering a little bit from long COVID, so bear with me. So the overview of the session, I'm going to give you a little bit of background and context so you can see the kind of various kind of ways in which the new RSE has evolved. I'm going to give you a small overview on why change is needed in RSE. This might be useful for you moving forward. I'm going to highlight the 6 key changes in the new statutory RSE, provide you with a definition which comes directly from the guidance, introduce you to the RSE code and the 3 strands: relationships and identities, sexual health and well-being, and empowerment, safety and respect. I'll give you a small example of how that works across the spiral curriculum, so across those 3 phases. And then I'll give you a short introduction to the 8 underpinning statutory principles for high quality RSE provision in the guidance, a little bit about how we're thinking now of moving towards a whole school approach. And then I have 2 films to share with you that I hope will bring a lot of the principles and the curriculum content to life. One is called Making Space, Transforming RSE in Wales, and that is an example of a secondary school preparing for the new RSE curriculum. And then the second film, RSE Webs, is an example from the primary school. And finally, I'll end up just by making sure that you know where to find some of the resources that we're using on our professional learning programme, including the Crush resource, which has a suite of school case studies and a range of resources and ideas for you to get started. Okay. So I'm going to begin with a little bit of background, as I said. My field, my research area is relationships and sexuality education. It has been for over 20 years. And a lot of the research in this area highlights that children learn about sexuality and relationships long before they start school. So as soon as children are entering the social world, they'll be interacting with complex and often contradictory messages about gender, sexuality, and relationships from a whole range of sources. So advertising, books, music, social media, TV, and of course from family members, from their peers and their wider communities. Even very young children are negotiating a range of social and cultural norms on these issues that will shape their day-to-day lives and the way that they imagine their futures. And this knowledge, often termed as the hidden curriculum, can include, of course, misconceptions and misinformation. And it can also challenge and exceed our expectations, our adult expectations of what children and young people are learning and experiencing. So RSE plays a really vital role then in working with children, young people, parents, carers and communities to create safe and non-judgmental environments to explore this information, these values about relationships and sexualities that children are already exposed to and often struggling to navigate for themselves. And when we create these safe, non-judgmental spaces in schools, we give children then the opportunity to ask questions. And we're sometimes surprised about what they already know, maybe the language that they use, the issues that they are aware of. And I always see these questions as these windows, these little glimpses into their worlds. So by building upon children and young people's own informal, if you like, and formal learning and experience, offline and online, schools then can become really key sites for learning from and responding to children and young people's questions and needs, from sexism to consent. And of course, then they're key sites for prevention, protection, and change. But all of this, of course, also involves working in very close partnership with specialist services and, of course, parents and local communities. And this is, if you like, the whole school approach. And I'll be coming back to that in a moment. So this slide here gives you an overview, if you like, of the journey that Wales has been on to radically overhaul what used to be called sex and relationship education. So as you can see, it started off with an expert panel, which I chaired, invited into by Kirsty Williams. And then there was an evidence report, a 160-page evidence report, and a series of recommendations back in May 2018. And since then, there have been numerous consultations with schools, with communities, the wider public, and slowly the guidance has been developed, revised, and in January 2022, the final version of the statutory guidance was published. Now, I thought this slide might be useful because there's not so much in the way of a rationale in the statutory guidance about why change was needed. So if you're asked by your teachers, your communities, why are these things changing, maybe this slide will be helpful for you. So this is an overview really kind of from all of the research in that long evidence report and more recently to capture, if you like, some of the key reasons, if you like, why RSE is changing, not just in Wales, in other countries too. And many teachers have found this useful, so I'm sharing it again with you. So drawing on a wide range of national and international research, the expert panel, which I chaired, found that previous law and guidance on sex and relationships education in Wales, as it was called then, was outdated. And its non-statutory status meant that it was often poorly resourced and given quite low priority in schools, which led then to uneven and unequal provision. In addition, the expert panel also found a range of things, is what I have on the slide here too. So school-based SRE has been criticised for being too biological, with a focus on human development, puberty and sexual health at the expense of a focus on children's rights, gender and sexual equity, and on children's emotions and sexual relationships and experiences. School-based SRE has also been criticised for being too negative and risk-focused without giving enough attention to the positive aspects of relationships and sexuality. Such approaches, which often use shock and shame to educate young people, have been shown not to be effective. What's needed are affirmative, positive approaches that offer support, hope, encouragement, and possibility. Research shows also there's a big gap between what children and young people want to learn and the SRE they experience in school contexts. Quite frequently, children report learning about SRE issues maybe too late in their lives. And part of the reason for this gap between learning and experience is that there's not enough opportunities often for children and young people to influence what they learn and how, and make it relevant for their lives. Current law and guidance on SRE is outdated. It fails to reflect the ways in which children and young people are navigating an increasingly complex world of expanding and contracting, if you like, understandings and experiences of gender, sexuality, and relationships. School-based SRE often only refers to heterosexual relationships and sometimes fails to include lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer and questioning, that's the LGBTQ+, identities, expressions, experiences, relationships and rights. This often then fails to meet children and young people's diverse experiences, needs, questions and concerns. Finally, SRE is often inadequate for children and people with disabilities and additional learning needs. Too often, the research argues that schools struggle to promote the relationship and sexual rights of young people with disabilities or ensure access to accessible and developmentally appropriate resources. Now, if you want to find out a little bit more about that, the previous slide has images of the 2 evidence reports. So, and all of those documents are available, I know, on the CSE website. Okay, so this slide then highlights some of the key changes that you will find in the guidance. And I'm just going to highlight those 6 key changes, so you can see, if you like, how things have changed, maybe from your understanding of the old SRE. So first of all, the definition of sex and relationships education has changed, and it's expanded to become relationships and sexuality education. So relationships now comes first, and sexuality has expanded. It's not just sex anymore, it's sexuality. And this new definition really signals a much more holistic and integrated curriculum that can be explored across schools to meet the diverse needs of children and young people. And it's very connected to a point I'm going to make earlier about sexuality, relationships and sexuality education as a cross-curricular subject. So it's much more expansive now, what counts, if you like, as RSE. RSE will also now be statutory for all children ages 3 to 16. In line with best practice, schools are now able then to start to build a spiral RSE curriculum from a young age. This ensures that from foundation phase onwards, teachers can co-create a relevant and developmentally appropriate curriculum that will support learners throughout their school lives. Importantly, RSE will be provided as part of a whole school approach in line with best practice and the new curriculum for Wales, and I'll come back to this later in the talk. Importantly, and this is a big change I think that we've noticed in our professional learning programme, is that RSE now will be integrated into and across the new 6 AOLEs. So it is now a cross-curricular subject. So this means that learners will be able to explore themes holistically, and learning won't be limited anymore to like standalone lessons or assemblies or in one area of the curriculum like PSE. It will be across all 6 AOLEs. Children's rights to RSE is also now protected by ending the parental right to withdraw. So parents will no longer be able to withdraw their children from RSE, which means that all children will now have the right to participate in this new holistic, developmentally appropriate RSE. And finally, in terms of what, how Wales is defining and approaching RSE, there's a big emphasis and a continued emphasis. This isn't new, this has always been part of Wales's RSE. There's an emphasis on rights, on equity, on LGBTQ+ inclusivity and empowerment in both the content and the pedagogy of RSE provision. So I thought this slide would be useful. The new statutory guidance can be found on Hub. There's a link on the screen there. At the moment, you can't easily pull off that as a PDF. So you'll see on that white block there what is in the guidance. These are the key headings from that guidance, which you can refer to. And I've pulled out a quote there from the guidance, which I think captures those key changes that I've just outlined. So very clearly now, Welsh Government states that RSE provision helps to ensure learners develop a positive understanding of relationships and sexuality and recognise misconceptions. So it really emphasises the affirmative straight away. RSE aims to empower learners in line with their needs, experiences and wider development. Through discussion and by responding to learners' questions and needs, it can provide safe and empowering environments that enable learners to reflect on and express their views and feelings on a range of issues. So all the way through there's a language of empowerment, of safety, of equity, and of learners' needs and their views, and having that responsive, relevant curriculum. And that's a real hallmark of RSE. So I'm going to start now by just giving you an introduction regarding the mandatory content, or what our Welsh Government called the Code, and then I'm going to explore just some of those key underpinning principles in the guidance, and then give you some examples through the 2 films, and then, as I said, finish up with the crash resource. So it's only a brief overview, but hopefully it gives you enough to know what's coming and maybe how to begin to prepare for your own journey in relation to statutory RSE. Okay, so in terms of the content, the 6 themes that you see on the screen here are now embedded across 3 core strands. So these 6 themes were originally drawn from and consolidated from UNESCO's original 8 themes. Now they're down to 6. So when you look at the guidance, you'll see that the Welsh Government here is committed to covering the following themes in RSE: relationships, rights and equity, sex, gender and sexuality, bodies and body image, sexual health and well-being, and violence, safety and support. And it says to assist schools and settings in the planning of RSE, these themes now are interwoven into the learning strands. And there are 3 learning strands which are captured in what they call the RSE Code. So if you're a little bit unsure what the RSE Code is, there's a quote here which again might be useful for you as you share this out in your schools. And it says that the RSE Code basically contains the mandatory requirements, the legal basis from which is set out in the legislation summary of this curriculum for Wales framework guidance. It sets out the themes and matters that must be encompassed in RSE. Curriculum and teaching and learning must encompass the mandatory element of RSE outlined with the following RSE Code. So the code is the mandatory content. And as I said, it is explored across 3 themes. And I'm going to just give you a little overview of those 3 themes. If you go along onto the website and you have a look, basically you can click on each of those strands, and what you find is it opens up a kind of green box with all of the content there for each of those three strands. I'm not going to go through over the whole content, there's quite a lot of it, but I am going to give you a flavour of those 3 key strands. So first of all, we have relationships and identity. So this strand focuses on the range of relationships that human beings have throughout their lives, how identity can be shaped by relationships and sexuality, and the importance of human rights in securing healthy, safe, and fulfilling relationships in an inclusive society. So you get the sense of the ways in which they're approaching identity in the context of RSE as something that happens throughout in people's lives, and it is all about rights, safety, fulfilling and positive relationships, and inclusivity. So the second quote I thought would be useful in terms of that inclusivity, that in this strand, learners need to be supported to recognise and value different types of relationships, including families and friendships, as well as the diversity within different types of relationships, including LGBTQ plus diversity, and that these can change over time. So you can already maybe see that holistic RSE you can explore across history and around the world, and it's very kind of broad in terms of what's included here. The second strand is sexual health and well-being, and this strand focuses on learning about how living things grow, reproduce, and have a life cycle. How it's about developing an understanding of the human body, including people's feelings about their bodies and how these can be represented. It also looks at the health issues related to relationships and sexuality, and an understanding of how sexuality and sexual health affects our well-being. So again, you've got reproduction and life cycles, you've got emotion there, feelings, and you've also got representation. So you can explore this in media, online, and of course, globally around the world and across history. The second quote again just gives you a little bit more detail here. And it says, as learners, all of this learning will focus on recognizing the diversity of human body types, how perception and understanding of the human body is shaped by society, the law, science and technology, and the impact of this on well-being. So again, they're giving you clues all the way through about how you might explore this across each of the AOLEs. And then the final strand is empowerment, safety, and respect. And this strand focuses on learners' rights to safety and protection. So again, that emphasis on rights here. It focuses on freedom from harm and discrimination, and how and where to seek information, help and support, and also how to support and advocate for the rights, fair treatment, and respect for all. So learners then in this strand need to develop an understanding of the social, emotional, physical and legal nature and impact of harmful behaviours, including all bullying and LGBTQ-based bullying, sexual violence and gender-based violence in a range of contexts, including online. So I've pulled out that second quote so you can see this strand is very much focused around that very broad understanding, if you like, of the different violences around the world that impact upon young people. But the first quote there in white is to kind of give an emphasis on maybe how you might approach this. So again, it's about learners' rights to safety and protection, their freedom from harm, they're seeking information, help and support in this area, and also that sense again of change and transformation, how they might advocate for the rights, fair treatment and respect for all. So here is an example of one of the strands and how Welsh Government have explored this strand across 3 phases via what you could call a spiral curriculum approach. So broadly, phase 1 is from age 3, phase 2 is from age 7, and phase 3 is from age 11. And this is different to the 5 phases of the 6 AOLEs. And the ways in which the code is written is also different. So when you're exploring the code and you're looking at the way it's written in relation to the what matters statements of the other 6 AOLEs, do bear in mind that it is differently constructed across those 3 strands. So Welsh Government are very clear here that the 3 phases are understood as developmental phases. So again, go back, if you like, to what counts as relevant developmentally appropriate RSE. And they talk about how they are to be understood as a suite of building blocks of progression in RSE. So they say as learners progress, they'll be building upon previous learning from either phase 1 or phases 1 and 2. So as learners progress, they're consolidating, they're strengthening their skills, their knowledge, and they're applying them to new and relevant contexts. So again, that notion of a relevant, responsive curriculum is what constitutes a developmentally appropriate pedagogy. They also are very clear that when you are thinking about interpreting the learning statements inside each of the phases, that the learning for RSE refers to both what is taught expressly, so that might be maybe what you think about as something that's happening in the classroom, but also throughout the curriculum and in the whole school environment through a whole school approach. So when you're considering RSE, think about it as happening across the school. You're creating a learning environment. The guidance outlines a vision for how this content should be delivered. And I'm just going to summarize this as follows. And again, this is something that we want to open up, and we do open up in our professional learning programme, and in any future conferences we will explore each of these in more depth. First of all, RSE provision must be informed, as I've just outlined, by a whole school approach. So quoting from the guidance, this means effectively linking all aspects of school, including the curriculum, policy, staff, school environment and community, to support learners in their relationships and sexuality education. Secondly, schools and settings should discuss, explore RSE in the context of children's rights as protected by the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child, or the UNCRC for short. And they say a rights-based approach is supported by equity, should be embedded in the learning. So you're understanding and exploring maybe individual rights, always in the context of equity and equality. So what needs to change in the world, if you like, to be able to exercise human rights. RSE will be realised in a way that is inclusive in accordance with the principles of equality. And they say this, of course, includes gender equity and LGBTQ+ inclusivity. Fourthly, RSE, as we've already outlined, is a broad, interdisciplinary and complex area that includes biological, social, psychological, spiritual, ethical and cultural dimensions. So again, it's a real, maybe a shift in mindset now. We're seeing RSE in this holistic, cross-curricular way. And if you go on to the guidance on the hub, you will find that if you go to each of the AOLEs and you scroll right down to the end, for example, if you looked at expressive art, scrolled all the way down, you'll find then a selection of paragraphs for the cross-cutting themes, one of which obviously is RSE, and there'll be a paragraph on how do we explore RSE through the expressive arts. Scroll down to maths and numeracy. How do we explore RSE through maths and numeracy? And it goes across each of the AOLEs. So if you're a little bit unsure about how to get started, take a look at that, at those paragraphs. Fifthly, schools should include learners' perspectives to ensure relevant and responsive RSE and provide increasing opportunities for learners to help direct their learning as they progress. So learners' views about what, how and where they learn should be taken into consideration so that the RSE curriculum can truly reflect the experiences that children and young people encounter in society. That's really fundamental to Wales's RSE. If you've got just 3 phases, you absolutely have to find ways to really listen to the needs and views of your learners so that you can co-create with them a curriculum that meets their needs. And those needs will, of course, be different for each group of learners. So it's getting to know your learners and their questions and experiences well as you create that curriculum. That's what is a relevant, responsive and developmentally appropriate curriculum. And then the last 3 there, engaging with learners. So schools and settings should have clear lines of communication in relation to RSE and should engage with learners, parents, carers and the wider community, offering them the opportunity to engage with learning, teaching and RSE. So again, this is a co-produced curriculum, not just with your learners, but also with the wider communities, really supporting each other as you move forward, which is why a crucial part of the RSE is that professional learning is a key requirement for high quality RSE provision, and it should occur at school, cluster, regional and national level. It's one of the reasons why CSE have invested so much in professional learning to prepare teachers moving forward. I've jumped around a bit, excuse me. One of the ones I wanted to return to is the positive, protective and preventative. So schools should look to create safe and supportive environments, learning environments, and these help create trust and allow learners to, a safe space to consider learning, ask questions and express their thoughts and feelings. And practitioners should seek to present learning around RSE issues positively and meaningfully. So if you remember, we went back to those why is change needed. One of the biggest findings from the research is that RSE is often explored through risk, rather than maybe more affirmative ways in to explore the risks. So there's a real emphasis in the RSE guidance around positive ways in, affirmative ways in, to explore some of these sensitive topics, and to ensure that then when they learn, the learning environments that you create are empowering learning environments for all children and young people, and of course for the teachers and schools providing that provision as well. And a lot of our professional learning focuses a lot on how do you do that. Okay, so we're drawing to the end now of this short presentation, and I'm going to show you 2 films. The first film is called Making Space, Transforming Relationships and Sexuality Education in Wales. And it was a film that we created just before lockdown. And this is a school that's been working for a number of years and in preparing for the new RSE in Wales. So it's a film that captures some of that journey, from starting out to listening to young people, and then what do you do with what you find out, and then it's a little bit of their journey as they move forward. You'll see some quotes at the end of the film, which are from one of the previous versions of the guidance, but you'll see that all of the underpinning principles we've shared this morning, and the content in those 3 strands, you'll see them come up. So when you're looking at what young people are telling you, what they want to learn, you can actually do a mapping exercise of what they're saying and sharing with the teachers, and the 3 strands. And they all relate to some aspect of that RSE code, which is comforting, which means that the code is working when young people tell you what they want to learn about, what's happening for them, the questions that they have, and you have a code that can respond to those questions and needs. So this is the film Making Space. Make space for us. Make space for us.
Renold, olé ini. Do you know what I mean? Tingle between Virgo.
Make space for us.
Tingle between Virgo.
Make space for us.
Renold, olé ini. Tingle between Virgo. Do you know what I mean? Tingle between Virgo. Do you know what I mean?
Make space for us.
Tingle between Virgo.
Space for us. Make space for us.
Tingle between Virgo.
They want to tell me what they think. Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you think we do accept people that are different? Do you think we do? Think we're good at that here? I think everybody's good at that. Not so much.
By giving you a little bit of a voice today, and you telling me what you want to learn about, that's quite empowering as well, isn't it?
schools need to get out of it, you know. And if we don't do that, then we're not, again, if you go back to the four purposes, they're not going to be ambitious, capable learners. They're not going to be ethical, informed citizens if we don't allow them to shape the curriculum, really. Which is what the data allows you to do. And I obviously like it because it's creative ways of collecting data. It's about always creating new things and new ways of capturing people ideas, people opinions.
Do you know what I mean?
Make space for us.
Team couple between verbal.
Make space for us. Make space for us.
Do you know what I mean? Team couple between verbal.
Make space for us. Space for us. Space for us. Space for us.
Do you know what I mean?
Space for us. Space for us.
Team couple between verbal.
Make space for us.
Do you know what I mean?
Make space for us. Make space for us. Space for us. Space for us. Space for us.
It seems to me that co-construction is an overused term, but when you look at what young people want to learn and want to discuss about relationships, sexuality, it seems that as senior leaders and as teachers that we can learn a lot about what it is that they view as important and what it is that we need to help them with so they can navigate their very complicated and very challenging childhood and time as young adults. And I think if we don't listen to what the young people are telling us, we're just going to miss the boat.
It's given me the opportunity to feel like I can be myself no matter what, and that school will be there for me.
And then the second and final film I'm going to share in this short webinar is called Making RSE Webs, Getting Creative with Relationships and Sexuality Education in Primary Schools. So this again is a primary school's journey of finding new ways and creative ways to listen to children on what matters to them in the core areas of RSE, how to create those safe, responsive learning environments, and then focusing on one aspect, if you like, of the three core strands. So this one's focused a little bit more around sexual health and well-being, but you'll find those core underpinning principles of rights, equity, empowerment, LGBTQ inclusivity running through this film. But the emphasis is on the power of creative methods to do to provide, if you like, high quality RSE. So this is Making RSE Webs.
The
creative aspect of it has been lovely, because as the children get older, it's really important that they're still very creative. So for them to be able to make models and trees and display across the school has been really important. So we're hoping now to move the Diversity Street display into our hall, where it can be accessed by many more children. It was such a lovely project.
We now look at RSE almost like a fluid, ever-changing, adapting conversation almost with our children. The creative RSE sessions gives them an opportunity to express themselves, to say their views in different ways, so they can show us a lot of what they're thinking through exploring ideas, and through different modes of learning. They can show us what they've learned and what they've understood, and how we can move forward with them to progress further.
So this brings the presentation to a close. There are many more films linked to the professional learning programme that you will have access to via the CSE platform. But I just wanted to share with you the resources and the resource base, the evidence resource base that we have been kind of creating over the years. So some of the case studies, like making RSE webs, there are many more school case studies of getting started inside the Crush resource. So the Crush resource is a resource for practitioners. It shares our journey of professional learning with examples moving forward, and resources such as, like, how do I begin on a whole school approach to RSE? How do I map across all 6 AOLEs to ensure that the strand is explored across in a cross-curricular way, and other resources as well about different organisations that can support you moving forward. So the Crush resource is an evolving resource. We are currently in the process of updating that resource in alignment with the new RSE code, including work on the 3 strands, and look at the Crush resource for something more bespoke for Wales that reflects and shares how we are working with teachers on their journey to prepare for the new statutory relationships and sexuality education. Thank you so much for listening, and if you want to find out more about professional learning opportunities, please do contact CSE and they will get in touch with new dates in the forthcoming year. Thanks very much.